Okay, following on from curtain class and tutorial, or cloth modifier specifically with curtains, one of you approached me and asked me about making kind of these swags, these curved draped cloths. You see them on balances and stuff like that. So this kind of thing here, okay. But more than that, how to make them curved to fit a round object. Okay. Well, I thought about this for a couple of days, and it did present me a couple of problems, but I think I figured out a way to do it. So let's go ahead and see what we can do. So start a new Blender scene here. I'm using Blender 2.67b, which as of today is the latest, and I'm going to delete this default cube. Okay, and let's just turn on some screencast keys. I'm going to add, using Shift A, a plane. Same as we did with the curtains. Leave it in that default view, that's fine. And I'm just going to scale it up on the y-axis only, so that's SY. Okay. Now I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to subdivide it a few times. Give me around about 1024 faces. Man, that should work fine. Okay, now because we're going to be working with animations, first of all I'm going to make sure I've got a timeline open. So I'll just drag down a new viewport there and make that a timeline. And what I'm going to do now to make things a lot easier later on, because a lot of you missed this step on the actual curtains, you did it on tablecloth but not the curtains, is I'm going to unwrap this. So I'm just going to drag across a UV editor window. Which is there. Okay, I'm going to add a new image just by pressing this plus here. Let's call it swag, no alpha, and that should be okay. Right. Now I'm going to unwrap this, so make sure my mouse is in my 3D viewport. You put unwrap, and there you can see it's unwrapped perfectly to that texture, which is great. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do here, we haven't done this before, is I'm going to expand this left hand window. Okay, and here under image, we've got our image saved as swag, etc. I'm just going to change this to UV grid. Okay, what that does is it puts this kind of UV texture, like a alignment texture. It makes things easier to see. Okay, so that's the UV grid, and when I come over here I'm going to make this textured, so you can see that grid is transferred onto my object. It just makes things a bit easier to see what's going on. Okay, right, so I'm just going to close this out for now. Right, so let's go into edit mode again. And what we're going to do, we're going to pin this cloth and we're going to shrink it, same as we did with the curtain animation, just to get the starts of the pleats dropping down. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I decided I wanted 4 pleats, which means I need 5 rows of pins. Okay, so I've gonna select a vertex on the first row. I'm going to hold my mouse over one of the edges that make that row, and I'm going to use Shift Alt right mouse button, and that selects that complete row. Okay, my next one will be straight up the middle, so I hold my mouse over one of the edges that make up that edge or that row. Again, Shift Alt right mouse button, same over here, hold my mouse over the edge, Shift Alt right mouse button, and then I'm going to pick a halfway point between each of these, which is somewhere around there. It doesn't have to be exactly accurate, because in fact, you know, it might look a little better if there were slight differences, but for the purpose of this, round about there I think is halfway. Shift Alt RMB. Yeah, it looks about even. Right, so now I've got these vertices selected, I'm going to use them as pins. So I'm going to come across here to my object data, the little triangle. Okay, I'm going to create the vertex group. I'm going to call it, surprisingly, pins. Okay, I'm going to assign those pins. Right, so if I deselect and select, I can see I've got them selected and assigned. Right, that's good. Now we can go back into object mode tab, into object mode. Right, and we'll start on the keyframes. We're on frame number 1 here, which is the flat material, the flat piece of cloth, if you like. Okay, I'm going to I to add a keyframe at frame 1. So I, and I want location, rotation, and scale. Okay, now I want my animation to run. I'm guessing 50 frames, about 2 seconds will be enough, so I'll just bring my timeline over to 50. You can see there it's 50. It doesn't have to be exactly 50, but somewhere around there. Okay, now what I want to do here is I want to scale it in on the x-axis, so I start to develop these pleats in the cloth. So SX, somewhere about there should be good. Okay, and again I want to insert a keyframe there, so it's I, location, rotation, scale. Okay, so that should be good. So if I scrub this back and forth, you can see it's shrinking, and that's what we want. Okay, now I'm going to come across to my physics tab, and I want a cloth modifier on this. So select the cloth. I think I'm going to use a silk preset, nice and soft. Okay, we want to pin some of those vertices, so we select the pin in, and we select our pins group. Okay, and I'm just going to, for the sake of habit, actually, always like to do this, is add a self collision so it doesn't fold into itself. It doesn't, the vertices, the geometry doesn't cross over. Right, we should be good to go there, so I'm going to use Alt A to start my animation. Let's see what happens. Something's not gone right there. Just going to let this play out once. There we go, it worked the second time. Sometimes it's worth just letting it run through a time or two, and we can see it's right into the cache, to the buffer, because we've got this blue line as it's recording. Okay, so just going to let that play out, and then we'll select a frame for it. Okay, which shouldn't be too hard, because after about 40 frames it's all the same. Right, that's it, that's working. So I press escape to come out of it. I can scrub along, and there you go, 50 frames. Some slight movement, it doesn't really matter. You can choose any of these along here. Keep things nice and even. I'm going to choose 100. Okay, now I'm going to come across to my modifiers tab, which is the little wrench, and I'm going to apply that modifier. So now if I go into edit, you'll see that the geometry is all where I want it. Okay, so we created these kind of pleats. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to rotate all this up, okay, so the pleats can then fall down on themselves. Okay, so we created the first start of the shape of it, which is, you know, kind of like this corrugation. So rather than try and explain it, let's do it. So I'm going to rotate this on the y-axis, Y, and as I'm rotating, I'm looking down here. It gives me the angle that I'm at. So RY, and I can see that it's a negative number. Okay, so I don't want it bang on 90. I want it a little less. So I'm just going to type in here on my numpad minus 85. Okay. So if we look at it sideways on, we can see that these pleats should fold over each other because they're not right on top, so it's a bit more predictable. Right, now also looking at this now, I can see that all my normals are on the reverse side, so I'm just going to fix that real quick. Okay, so I'm going to go to edit mode, select all, and I'm going to use the W, which is the specials menu. So W, and I want to flip normals. Okay, so now you see all my normals are on the side that I want. Right, so that's that. What we need to do now is make another cloth animation. Okay, so these just fold down on top of each other. But before we do that, we need to clear the original animation because it's still there. The keyframes are still there. Okay, the animation is kind of set, but the keyframes are still there. Right, so how do we delete keyframes? Let's change this view from a timeline to a dope sheet. Okay, I'm just going to expand this up so we can see. Okay, now with our keyframes, we can see we got one here at 0 or first frame and one here at 50. Okay, this timeline is kind of where we left everything. Okay, now I've moved that timeline, I've lost my location or my rotation, but that's alright. I remember what it was. It was rotate on the y-axis by -85. Okay, now if we expand this location rotation scale, we can see we got all these yellow dots. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the first one, shift right click to select the next and the next, and keep doing that all the way through, and the same on the keyframe 50. Okay, till they're all selected. Alright, now I'm going to press X and delete keyframes, and they're gone. Now if I move my timeline, you see nothing happens. So I'm just going to move it back to 0. Right, I'm going to change this back to a timeline again so we can work on our next animation, and just rotate this view slightly so I can see what I'm doing. If I go into edit mode and I come back here to the object data, if I unselect everything here using the A key and just select our pins, you can see we still got our pinning group, which is what we want. Okay, so now we want this to fall down on each other, so gravity to take effect on the Z or the Z axis, so which is fine. So I'm going to come across to the physics tab. I'm going to add another cloth modifier. Okay, now it's still at silk. Let me just draw this across a bit. It's still at silk. Okay, all my settings are still there apart from the pinning. Right, so I am going to add the pinning, and the pinning group was pins. Okay, I'm just going to add a self collision again so it doesn't fold into each other. Right, so we want keyframe 0, and we don't need to add any keyframes here because the pins are going to hold it in place. It's just going to drop down. Okay, so let's try this with an Alt A. Okay, this first one isn't writing. There's no blue line, so I'm just going to let this play through, and it's still not writing. Okay, so I'm not sure what's going on there, so I'm just going to go back, and Blender can be a bit funny with this. I've got my pinning groups, I've got my pins, I've got my self collision. Okay, right, Alt A, nothing happening. Let it run through. There you go, the second one, it's working. Like I say, Blender is a bit finicky like this. It's probably a workflow doing this, but I just haven't got around to discovering it all. So I'm just going to let this run through, and then we can get on to the next stage. .230, we're nearly there. Okay, now it's playing through. Alright, so I pressed escape to stop the animation playing. Just going to scrub along. Somewhere about there looks good. Back to my modifiers tab and apply that cloth modifier. Okay, so now if we look, we've got these folded over pleats that we were looking for. Let me just make a smooth shader on this so it looks a bit better. Actually I need to select all the vertices, make them smooth. I'll go into edit mode now. You see we've got this nice smooth pleated kind of effect going on. The backside we're not seeing, but if it's wrapped around a table or against a wall, you're not going to see the backside, so I'm not going to worry too much about that geometry.